Hi everybody, welcome to my YouTube channel Dr. Srinivas Medical Concepts and my FB page Dr. Srinivas Concepts. This is Dr. Srinivas, neurologist from Andhra Pradesh, India. I am also the medical author of the book Focused Neurology. Today we are going to talk about a very fascinating topic, the indispensable concepts of neuro-ophthalmology. The neuro-ophthalmology and the indispensable concepts. This topic is going to be most useful to neurologists, ophthalmologists, and perhaps to most of the physicians and healthcare workers associated with medicine. Neuro-ophthalmology. The indispensable concepts. Here I'm going to talk about 10 important, essential, indispensable concepts. Here we go. The first, why are pupils dilated after death? Why are pupils dilated after death? Because the common thinking is that parasympathetic causes constriction of the pupil, sympathetic causes dilatation of pupil, and therefore after death, since parasympathetic and sympathetic are affected, the pupil should be in the mid position. But what we see in clinical medicine is that pupils are dilated after death and not in mid position. What is the explanation? The explanation is that though pupil is controlled by parasympathetic and sympathetic, the parasympathetic has got more control over the pupil than the sympathetic. Parasympathetic has got more control over the pupil than sympathetic. And hence, after the death, the predominant parasympathetic control over the pupil is affected, and therefore pupil cannot constrict, and therefore it starts dilating. So why pupils are dilated after death? It is because parasympathetic has got more control over the pupil than sympathetic, and therefore after the death, the predominant action of the parasympathetic, namely the constriction of the pupil, is affected, and therefore the pupils are dilated after death. A very important, indispensable concept, especially for house surgeons who are working in the wards on a continuous basis, and the residents who see patients, who see critical patients and have to declare whether they are dead or not, or they have any severe brainstem dysfunction. So pupils are dilated after death. The second important, indispensable concept: how does one differentiate between the extrinsic pathology and the intrinsic pathology of the third nerve? When the third nerve gets affected, how does one differentiate an extrinsic compression or an intrinsic pathology of the third nerve? What are the functions of the third nerve, and what are the dysfunction produced when the third nerve is affected? When the third nerve gets affected, it results in 4D. The dilatation of the pupil because the parasympathetic fibers are affected, the drooping of the eyelid because the levator palpebrae superioris is affected, the divergent squint because the medial rectus is affected, and because of that they'll have double vision. So 4Ds: dilatation of the pupil, drooping of the eyelid, divergent squint, and double vision. All the functions of the third nerve, namely the motor supply of the third nerve, the movements of the third nerve, are pertaining to the third nerve per se. But the pupillary function, namely the parasympathetic fibers which cause constriction of the pupil, goes superficially or peripherally on the third nerve. And therefore, when there is an extraneous compression of the third nerve coming from outside and compressing the third nerve, example, posterior communicating artery aneurysm, it is the superficially parasympathetic fibers which get affected, and therefore parasympathetic function, that is pupillary constriction, is lost. There is pupillary dilatation. So in an extraneous compression of the third nerve, pupillary dilatation or the pupillary fibers are the first to get affected. Whereas if it's an intrinsic pathology of the third nerve, like diabetes third nerve palsy, it is otherwise known as pupillary sparing third nerve palsy. It affects the center of the third nerve because of the vascular compromise, and since parasympathetic fibers are superficially placed, they escape. So in an intrinsic pathology of the third nerve, the pupillary fibers are not affected. In case they are affected very, very late. Example, diabetic third nerve palsy. So extraneous compression of the third nerve, the pupillary fibers are the first to get affected. The pupillary parasympathetic fibers are the first to get affected. Intrinsic pathology of the third nerve, the parasympathetic pupillary fibers are the last to get affected. Second important indispensable concept. The third concept, why a pontine lesion like pontine hemorrhage causes bilateral small pupils, whereas a medullary lesion like medullary infarct causes unilateral and ipsilateral small pupil. Pontine lesions bilateral small pupils, but a medulla oblongata lesion unilateral and ipsilateral small pupil. What is the difference? We know that the sympathetic tract fibers run in the midbrain, pons, medulla on the both sides. So we have two sympathetic tracts running in the midbrain, pons, medulla oblongata. The medulla oblongata is supplied by the two vertebral arteries, but pons is supplied by a single artery which forms together to form a single basilar artery, and again midbrain is supplied by the two posterior cerebral arteries. So we have pons which is supplied by a single artery, that is the basilar artery, but medulla oblongata is supplied by the two vertebral arteries. And therefore, when there is a pontine hemorrhage like a basilar artery rupture, since the pons is supplied by a single artery, the blood goes bilaterally on both sides, affects both sympathetic tracts, produces bilateral honors, and therefore both pupils are small and constricted. Whereas medulla oblongata is supplied by two vertebral arteries, and therefore if medulla oblongata is affected, only one vertebral artery gets affected, the sympathetic tract on that side gets affected. So pupil is small only on one side, unilateral and ipsilateral. So pontine lesion produces bilateral small pupils, bilateral because a single artery, basilar artery, when there is a rupture, it goes on both sides and both sympathetic tracts are affected. A very important, indispensable concept. The frontal lobe, if it gets affected, there is a ipsilateral conjugate gaze and hemiplegia on the opposite side. But if pons gets affected, the conjugate gaze is towards the opposite side and the hemiplegia is also on the same side as that of the gaze. Why is that difference? It is because of the saccadic pathway. The horizontal eye movement, the center is in the pons, PPRF, paramedian pontine reticular formation, and the center for vertical eye movements is in the midbrain. For horizontal eye movements, imagine I need to look to the left. So the saccadic pathway originates from the right frontal eye fields area number 8, descends in the midbrain but goes to the opposite side of the pons in the PPRF. PPRF, paramedian pontine reticular formation, will pull the eyes towards each side by supplying the lateral rectus through 6th nerve and medial rectus on the opposite side through MLF. So if my right frontal eye fields area number 8 is stimulated, my eyes will look to the left. So when there's a lesion of the right frontal lobe, eyes cannot look to the left side, eyes will be looking to the same side, and since the corticospinal tract crosses at the level of the medulla oblongata and goes to the opposite side, hemiplegia on the opposite side. So eyes looking to one side, hemiplegia on the opposite side is a frontal lobe lesion. Whereas if a pons gets affected, it cannot pull the eyes towards its side because PPRF is affected. Eyes will go to the opposite side. Hemiplegia is also on the opposite side because crossing occurs at the level of the medulla oblongata. So eyes looks towards the side of hemiplegia in a pontine lesion, whereas in a frontal lobe lesion, eyes look to one side and hemiplegia on the opposite side. Very, very important, indispensable concept, especially when we approach stroke patients. Yes, another important concept is in thalamic hemorrhage, eyes look down and they are small pupils, myotic pupils. Why? Why should in thalamic lesion like thalamic hemorrhage, eyes should look down and the pupils are small? The eyes look down because thalamus is very close to the midbrain. As I told, the vertical eye center is in the midbrain. The up gaze and down gaze. The vertical eye movements comprise of up gaze and down gaze. Down gaze fibers descend straight away, whereas up gaze fibers cross over to the opposite side and then descend. And since thalamus is very close to the upper part of the midbrain, when there's a thalamic lesion like thalamic hemorrhage, it affects and impinges on the upper part of the midbrain, the rostral part of the midbrain. Therefore, the crossing up gaze fibers get affected, and therefore eyes cannot look upwards, eye looks downwards. So in thalamic hemorrhage, eyes looks downwards because it goes and impinges on the top of the midbrain where crossing up gaze fibers are affected. It causes small pupils because the hypothalamus, the sympathetic fibers originate from the hypothalamus, which is just underneath the thalamus. So when there's a thalamic lesion, hypothalamus gets affected, sympathetic tract gets affected. So pupils cannot dilate, pupils are constricted. So in a thalamic hemorrhage, eyes look downwards and pupils are small. Very important concept. What is locked-in syndrome? As I said, the midbrain has got vertical eye movements, pons has got horizontal eye movements, and therefore when there's a lesion in the pons, the horizontal eye movements, both the PPRF gets affected, so the horizontal eye movements get affected, and the corticobulbar fibers and the corticospan fibers which traverse through the pons gets affected. So patient cannot use upper limbs, he cannot use lower limbs, he cannot move eyes horizontally. But since midbrain is intact, the vertical eye movements are intact, patient can move eyes up and down. So this is locked-in syndrome. Locked-in syndrome is a pontine lesion wherein all the horizontal eye movements are affected. Patient cannot use upper limbs and lower limbs. The only movement is possible is the vertical eye movements because midbrain is intact. What is doll's eye movement and cause? Cold opposite, warm same. Very, very important, especially in terms of brain death. The 8th nerve is connected to the 4th, 3rd and 6th nerves through the MLF. So example, the 8th nerve on the right side is connected to the PPRF, paramedian pontine reticular formation on the left side. PPRF connects the lateral rectus 6th and MLF, the medial rectus on the opposite side, right. So when the 8th nerve is stimulated by pouring warm water or turning the head to the right side and stimulating the right vestibular apparatus, it goes and connects to the opposite left side PPRF, wherein the eyes are pulled towards the left side. So when we stimulate the vestibular apparatus by putting warm water or turning the head to the right side, eyes will move towards the opposite side. But frontal eye fields will try to compensate this, will try to push the eyes back to normal position by inducing a nystagmus. So when you put warm water, eyes will move towards the opposite side, but nystagmus will be towards the same side. When you put the cold water, the eyes cannot be moved towards the opposite side because you are inhibiting the vestibular apparatus. So eyes cannot move to the left side. Eyes will move to the same side. The frontal eye fields on the right side will now try to put the eyes back towards its normalcy by inducing a nystagmus. So when you put cold water or inhibit the vestibular apparatus, cold water, the nystagmus will be on the opposite side. When you put warm water or turn the head to the right side and stimulate the vestibular apparatus, the nystagmus will be towards the same side. So this is the acronym cold opposite warm same, by which we can assess the integrity of the brainstem. Next important concept is what is alexia without agraphia. Alexia means difficulty in reading. Agraphia means difficulty in writing. These patients have alexia without agraphia. That is, they don't have difficulty in reading, but alexia without agraphia. Alexia means difficulty in reading. Agraphia means difficulty in writing. Alexia means they'll have difficulty in reading. Agraphia means difficulty in writing, but without agraphia, they don't have any difficulty in writing. So what is this alexia without agraphia? Reading. The right side of vision goes to the left occipital cortex. The left side of the vision goes to the right occipital cortex. But the speech centers are on the left side. So if I want to see anything on the right side, from the right side it goes to the left occipital cortex and can convert it into a language form because my speech centers are also on the left side. So it is easy to convert anything on the right side into language form. But what I see on the left side goes to my right occipital cortex. To assess the language areas which are on the left, it has to cross the corpus callosum through the splenium of the corpus callosum and enter the speech areas. So here it needs corpus callosum. So what is alexia without agraphia? Alexia means difficulty in reading. So when there is a left posterior cerebral artery infarct along with the right occipital lobe dysfunction, the left occipital cortex is affected. It also supplies the splenium of the corpus callosum. So the left occipital cortex is affected, so they cannot look anything on the right. They can use the right occipital lobe, but the information is not being able to transmit it to the speech area because the corpus callosum, the bridge, the splenium of the corpus callosum is affected, so it cannot be transmitted. So they have alexia, difficulty in reading. Without agraphia, they do not have anything, no problem. They have no problem with the writing because writing does not need vision. Someone tells me it goes to my auditory apparatus, vernix area, Broca's area, motor area, I can write. So these are the patients who have alexia without agraphia, that is left posterior cerebral artery infarct, which affects the left occipital cortex as well as the splenium of the corpus callosum. So the information from the right occipital cortex cannot be transferred to the speech area which is on the left side. So alexia without agraphia, alexia, difficulty in reading. Without agraphia, there is no difficulty in writing, is characteristically seen in left posterior cerebral artery infarctions. They can write, but they cannot read what they have just written. Very, very interesting and fascinating concept. Alexia without agraphia. They don't have difficulty in writing, but they have difficulty in reading. The lesion is the left posterior cerebral artery infarct affecting the left occipital cortex and the splenium of the corpus callosum. The next important concept is, what is prosopagnosia? Inability to identify faces. You have occipital lobe which is primarily concerned with vision. You have occipitotemporal connections, occipitoparietal connections. Occipitotemporal connections is basically concerned with what? Including the identification of the face. So occipitotemporal connections is concerned with what? Normal identification of the faces, letters, objects. It is also concerned with the color processing. So if occipitotemporal cortex gets affected, what is affected? So they cannot identify the known faces. What of face is lost? So they cannot identify the faces. They can identify person by other means, but they cannot identify a person by looking at the face. So inability to identify known faces is known as prosopagnosia, where the lesion is in the occipitotemporal cortex, especially the fusiform gyrus. Unlike occipitotemporal cortex, which is concerned with what, we have occipitoparietal cortex, which is concerned with where, the spatial orientation. So if occipitoparietal lesion gets affected, the next important concept is asimultanagnosia. They cannot integrate the center of the vision with the periphery of the vision. If you ask them to look at the forest, they fix only, their vision gets fixed on a tree which is in their gaze, but not the entire forest. So they cannot integrate the center of the vision with the periphery of the vision, which is known as the asimultanagnosia. It is because of occipitoparietal lesions. So here if you ask them to encircle A's, wherein there are big A's and small A's, they encircle small A's because it falls within their gaze, but big A's, it does not fall in their gaze. They either think it is oblique lines or horizontal lines, so they do not encircle big A's, they encircle small A's. So this is asimultanagnosia. Generally we are able to see big letters but not small letters. Asimultanagnosia is opposite. They are able to see the small letters well because it falls within their gaze, but they are not able to see big letters because they are not able to integrate the center of the vision with the periphery of the vision, which is known as asimultanagnosia. A very important syndrome, balance syndrome, optic ataxia, oculomotor apraxia, and asimultanagnosia. This is one of the triad of balance syndrome. So these are the 10 indispensable concepts of neuro-ophthalmology. Every neurologist and ophthalmologist has to know, and perhaps all the healthcare workers need to know these indispensable concepts of neuro-ophthalmology. I hope you have enjoyed listening to my lecture. If you have any suggestions or comments, kindly post on to my YouTube channel. But please like and subscribe my YouTube channel, Dr. Srinivas Medical Concepts, and my FB page, Dr. Srinivas Concepts. Thank you. Bye.